I appreciate everybody being here. Let's call to order the City of Andover Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. We'll begin with the roll call. I'll start at my left, please.
Vance Garwood, Gary Israel,
Eric Peterson.
Kirsten Barnes.
Tim Hendricks.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 is the minutes from the May 18th, 2021 Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. If there's any discussion, now's a good time. Otherwise, we will look for a motion for approval of those minutes.
Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that we approve the minutes from the Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals from May 18th, 2021.
Thank you, Gary. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Tim Hendricks, second.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item number 4, communications. Both the committee and staff report, as well as the potential residential development report and building permit activity. Les, staff?
The building permit activity, you'll notice there's a little bit of a decline from last year. I did the math on it the other day. It's about 25% off of where we were last year at this time. I think we can probably attribute that to the Cornerstone addition. There's been a lag in finishing some streets there, and they're selling houses quicker than they can produce new lots. So I think those will pick up soon, as well as we, as you know, have 2 apartment projects that are looming to start construction just within the next 2 or 3 months.
Thank you. Les, any questions for staff about that? With that, I need a motion to recess the Planning Commission and convene the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that we recess the Planning Commission and convene the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second?
I, Kirsten Barnes, second.
Thank you, Kirsten. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We will now convene the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is case number BZAV-2021-06, a variance at 516 North Angle Lane. We would like to welcome everyone interested in this hearing and lay out a few ground rules. It is important that you present any facts or views that you have as evidence at this hearing so that findings can be made for the decision of this board. In order to grant a variance, 5 specific written findings of fact must all be met according to the state statutes and the city zoning regulations. This board is authorized by state statutes to make a decision appealable only to district court and not to the governing body. After our zoning administrator provides us with some information, I will call upon the applicant, and then we will hear from other interested parties. Once all have been heard, the applicant will have an opportunity for final comments. The board will close the hearing to further public comments and will then consider their decision, during which time they may direct questions to the applicant, the public, or staff. You should be aware that the board can require such conditions to be attached to the premises benefited by the variance as may be necessary to comply with the standards set out in Article 11.106. These are to reduce any potentially injurious effect of such variance upon other property in the neighborhood and to carry out the general purpose and intent of these regulations. Failure to comply with any of the conditions attached to a zoning permit for a variance shall constitute a violation of the regulations. You should also be fully aware that if the applicant chooses to describe various features of their development plans, the city can only enforce those provisions which are covered in zoning and other city codes. Anyone wishing to speak must be recognized by the chairperson and give their name and address. Please use the podium and speak clearly so that your comments can be recorded for inclusion into our minutes. Before we proceed with the hearing, I'll ask the commission members if any of them intend to disqualify themselves from participating in this case because they or a relative own property in the area of notification or have conflicts of interest.
No.
Hearing none, we'll move on to notification. Official notice for this hearing was published in the Butler County Times-Gazette on May 22nd, 2021, and notices were mailed to the applicant and 15 real property owners of record in the area of notification on May 24th, 2021. The record shows that at least 20 days have elapsed between the publication and mailing dates and the hearing date. Unless there is evidence to the contrary from anyone present, I will declare that proper notification has been given. Ex parte communication. Although we do not encourage such communications, I will ask the board if any of them have received any ex parte verbal or written communications prior to this hearing, which they would like to share.
No.
Hearing none. I will now call on the city's zoning administrator to provide us with a report on this case.
Mr. Chairman, you may note that in the official notice, there was a request there for a 1,200-foot storage shed on this property, but in all of the subsequent information, the drawing that's been provided and the summary of the case, that has been reduced down to a 900 square foot structure. That's because we've had some dialogue back and forth with the applicant about the required setbacks. The original 1,200-foot request assumed that the front of the building could be 25 feet from the curb, when indeed it needs to be 25 feet from the front property line. So you see in this exhibit that's up on the screen now, he's reduced that size down to a 30 by 30 versus a 30 by 40 that he had originally planned. This is kind of typical. This is a very unusually shaped lot. You can see it's more or less a triangle with an odd size side yard that tapers. It is about a third of an acre in area, which would support setbacks and so forth, required separation from the adjacent neighbors. The applicant will be back to you with a request for a side yard variance because of that unusual triangle shaped west side of the property. It's a little hard to squeeze in what would be required there, a 25-foot street side setback. If you could imagine that was a rectangular shaped lot, it would be much easier to do, but he's going to be back to you next month with an application to reduce that setback to fit the configuration you see on the screen.
Thank you. So just to be clear, this evening's, we're only reviewing the first variance, which is exceeding the maximum floor area. Instead of 300,
Correct.
we're asking for 900.
Correct.
Okay. I will now call upon the applicant to make his or her presentation on the request and any response to the zoning administrator's report. Welcome.
Good evening.
Please state your name and address for the
Scott
record.
Bonebreak, 516 North Angle Lane.
Glad to have you with us this evening.
I
Please.
appreciate
Cheers.
the opportunity. So basically and I guess I should have done some homework. When we purchased this property, it was always with the intention that we could have more square footage for storage. We're a family with kids, so by the time we have vehicles, we have UTVs, some recreational vehicles. I work for large general contractors, so I do a lot of, personal just hobbies, woodworking, different kind of things. So you can imagine a 2-car garage is currently a 0-car garage. So it would be nice to move those items into this new building so we could actually park our vehicles in in the garage on the house. So I don't know what all else you guys need to know. I did go through, I know everything went out to the neighbors, but I basically personally talked to all the neighbors to see if they had any issues, concerns. Prior to submitting it, nobody had any issues, but so.
I have a question.
Yes,
Is
sir.
the additional structure, is the appearance of it going to be similar to the house?
Well, and that's, I guess it was a question I had. Originally, I had intended on like a post frame, metal shed type building, but I didn't know if there was a covenant or that, and that's a question that I was going to look into if it needs to look like the house. That whole area is an older area of Andover, as I'm sure you all know. So just walking, where we walk our dog, it's a pretty common, there's, I don't think 20 or so, post frame metal buildings throughout the neighborhood. So in my opinion, it would work because everybody else has, but I don't know if the rules have changed or there's different regulations or anything.
I'll defer to staff if we could.
We're not aware of any covenants, but those are a covenant that only a homeowners association could enforce in district court.
And currently there's no homeowners association. I mean, these houses were built in, early to mid 60s. So, that's my intention, unless I guess you deem that's not acceptable, then we will go another route. So.
And I know the distance requirement is for next month, but I'm just curious, is the north end of this new structure going to line up kind of with the north end of the house and then go back from there? Or are you going to offset it at all?
It'll be offset because it gets a little skewy since we're on an angle. So I guess if you call it the northwest facing, I think there's about a 5-foot delta between the front of the new structure versus the house. But our house also stair steps. There's 3 different elevations, a garage, and then it bumps out 3 feet, and then it bumps out another 5 feet. So all in all, it will be within one of those planes, just not directly the attached garage. There will be a difference there. So
Is the garage going to be attached?
no,
Okay. Sure.
no, whole different structure.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one. I don't
Yes,
see
sir.
easements outlined on any of this. Do you have any utility easements? Because
I don't believe so.
that's,
No, I don't believe there are.
I assume you'll be using the same entry from Angle Lane as your drive
Yes.
through the house.
Yes. Yeah, it'd be the same driveway, and then that's another conversation of make it a little bit bigger, but
Sure.
it would be the same
Yep.
of what's existing
Yep.
there, yes. So
Scott, any idea how tall this building's going to be?
I'd have to do the math on the peak, but I intended on, in talking with post frame builders, they consider a 10-foot tall building on the outside, but on the inside it's not. So I don't foresee it being any taller than the house, which is just a traditional 1960s ranch. So
Okay.
I don't imagine the peak being any taller than the existing peak.
Okay.
So,
And overhead door on the front?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, basically facing the street, just like the attached garage.
Any other questions for Scott? All right, Scott, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this case? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So staff, have any written communications been received? No, sir. Nope. Thank you, sir. Scott, I'm sure I know the answer, but is there anything final you want to add to what you just said? Thanks, appreciate it. So hearing no further public comments, I hereby close the public portion of the hearing. There will be no further public comments unless the board wishes to ask questions to clarify information. The board will now deliberate the request to determine whether the evidence presented supports the conclusions of the required findings of fact The board will now consider the criteria provided for evaluation. And we have, I'm happy to do it.
I'll do it.
Go ahead, please.
The physical surroundings, shape, or topography of the property would result in a practical difficulty as distinguished from a mere inconvenience for the owner, lessee, or occupant, staff. The subject property is an unusually shaped 1/3 acre lot on an angled cornered street. The unusual shape creates a challenge for the owner to locate an accessory, but with variances could remain below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage limit of 35%. No additional traffic is expected as the intended use is personal storage.
Concur?
Granting the variance would result in material detriment or injury to other people or improvements in the neighborhood. Staff. No detriment and/or injury or other property or improvements is anticipated.
Concur.
Concur?
Granting the variance would result in an inadequate supply of light or air to adjacent property, substantially increased traffic congestion, increased fire risk, or substantially diminished property values in the neighborhood. Staff. The subject property is unusually shaped 1/3 acre on an angled corner street. The unusual shape creates a challenge for the owner to create an accessory, but with variances could remain below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage limit of 35%, while allowing adequate separation from adjacent neighbors. No additional traffic is expected as the intended use is personal storage.
Concur?
4, the request for a variance is not based exclusively on a desire of the owner, lessee, occupant, or applicant to make more money out of the property. Staff. The applicant has declared the intended use to be personal storage as an accessory residential use.
Concur?
Concur.
The requested variance arises from a condition unique to the property in question, which is not ordinarily found in the same zoning district, in which was not created by any action of the property owner or the applicant. Staff. The subject property is an unusually shaped 1/3 acre lot on an angled street corner. The unusual shape creates a challenge for the owner to locate an accessory, but with variances could remain below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage limit of 35%. No additional traffic is expected as the intended use is personal storage.
Concur?
This strict application of the provisions of these zoning regulations would result in unnecessary hardship for the owner, lessee, or occupant of the land or structures. Staff. The intent of lot coverage maximum is to promote health, safety, and general welfare of residents. The subject property is 1/3 of an acre, which provides a substantial area for accessory structures while remaining below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage of 35%.
Concur?
Granting the variance will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. Staff. The intent of lot coverage maximum is to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of its residents. The subject property is 1/3 of an acre, which provides a substantial area for accessory structures while remaining below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage of 35% and providing adequate separation from adjacent neighbors.
Concur.
Concur?
The requested variance will not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare. Staff. The intent of the lot coverage maximum is to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of residents. The subject property is 1/3 of an acre, which provides a substantial area for accessory structures while remaining below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage of 35% and providing adequate separation from adjacent neighbors. No additional traffic is anticipated.
Concur?
The requested variance will not be opposed to the general spirit and intent of these zoning regulations. The subject property is, staff. The subject property is unusually shaped 1/3 acre lot on an angled street corner. The unusual shape creates a challenge for the owner to locate an accessory. With variances could remain below the zoning district's maximum allowable lot coverage limit of 35%. No additional traffic is expected as the intended use is personal storage.
Concur.
Concur. Vance, thank you very much. So do we have a motion, our next step, do we have a motion to either approve, modify and approve, disapprove, or to table the discussion? And remember, we're only reviewing and making a motion for the first variance, which is exceeding the maximum floor area.
Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that after having considered the evidence at the hearing and determined that the finding of facts have been found that support all 5 conditions set out in subsection 11-106B2 of the zoning regulations in KSA 12-759E, I move that the chairperson be authorized to sign a resolution granting the variance for BZA-V-2021-06.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second by Vance Garwood.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. A resolution will be prepared and made available to the applicant as soon as reasonably possible, but no later than July 30th, 2021. If anyone is aggrieved by this decision, a further appeal can be made to the district court to determine its reasonableness within 30 days after the resolution is signed and filed with the zoning administrator. Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that we adjourn. I'm not going to say it now. The Board of Zoning Appeals and reconvene the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much for working so hard to get that out. I appreciate that, Gary. Do we have a second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We will now reconvene the Planning Commission with item number 5.2, which is the final plat of the 5.2, which is the final plat of the Meadowbrook Second Subdivision replat. Staff, Les?
Mr. Chairperson, the subject property is located west of South Andover Road and north of West Harry Street. The Meadowbrook Second Subdivision is a replat of the Meadowbrook subdivision that was approved back in late October 2019. The only change to this particular document from the document that was approved late last year is the increase of the rear yard utility easement on the east side for lots 1 through 9 of Block B along Meadowhaven Street. The applicant did attend our subdivision committee last week and spoke at length regarding the reasoning behind that. There is a tree row that he is looking to protect and preserve the natural quality of those properties. The applicant, Mr. Smith, did say that he would be communicating with any potential buyers of that property to let them know that any construction in those rear yards would potentially be limited. So he will be communicating that. As I mentioned before, it was approved, recommended for approval by the subdivision committee, and it is on your agenda this evening.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Justin. Before we move on, are there any questions for Justin or staff about that? If not, is Mr. Smith or Mr. Edwards with us this evening?
Kirk Miller, KE Miller Engineering.
Thank
Mr.
you for
Edwards
being
is
here.
not working today, so
Glad
taking
to
his
have you here.
spot. And I think it's pretty much described real well as to what we're looking at. It's just a matter of protecting some trees. And the Ron Smith is also the builder, so he can easily explain to the people. He's not selling the lots to anybody else.
Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion from anyone up here?
Well, I think
If
we
not-
hashed it out pretty good
Yep,
at the
sounds like it.
subdivision committee, and I applaud Mr. Smith for wanting to save those trees in the back. And hope the homeowners understand how valuable trees are.
Good.
Same story here.
Well, with that, do I have a motion? I've got this one. I, Eric Peterson, make a motion that we approve the Meadowlark Second Subdivision replat. I'm sorry, Meadowbrook Second Subdivision replat, and recommend that the governing body accept the dedication of land for public purposes.
I, Gary Israel, second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 5.3, the final plat, Hodges 7th subdivision. Staff?
The subject property is located at 309 West Turnpike Road, generally located at the northwest corner of North Main Street and the Kansas Turnpike. The applicant is proposing 7 duplex dwelling units on one lot, approximately 1.69 acres of property zoned MF2, attached single-family residential. The preliminary plat was approved by the Planning Commission in April of 2021. You may remember that we saw this property on May 18th, 2021, when the applicant was seeking a variance of 10 feet from the required 25-foot minimum front yard setback along West Turnpike Road. That's that top little sliver there up north. Staff has reviewed the final plat. We provided the applicant with some initial comments. All of those comments have been addressed, with the exception of a private access easement that staff has highlighted. And the applicant at the subdivision committee meeting mentioned that they are seeking to have that private access easement released, and that the easement would be vacated prior to city council approval. So I would recommend that any motion this evening would be contingent upon that easement being removed. That's all I have, unless there's any questions. The applicant, I believe, is in attendance. If you have any questions as well, it's Phil Meyer from Baughman Company.
Thank you, Justin. Any questions for Justin or for Phil?
No.
Sounds like subdivision hammered that one out pretty well, and we may have a motion contingency with it. So do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that we approve with modifications the Hodges 7th subdivision final plat, and recommend that the governing body accept the dedication of land for public purposes, dependent on that the applicant vacate the easement before the city council approval.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second to that?
Second by Kirsten Barnes.
Thank you, Kirsten. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We move on to agenda item 5.4, the final plat. Hope I say this right. The Speyside at Teradyne Estates. Good. Les, staff.
I'll go ahead and take this one
All right.
too, Mr. Chairperson. The subject property is located at the southeast corner of North 159th Street East and the Kansas Turnpike. The applicant is proposing single-family homes on 28 individual lots on approximately 8.52 acres of property zoned SF2. The preliminary plat was approved by the Planning Commission on April 20th, 2021. Again, we did have a few comments for the applicant, and those comments have been addressed. The majority of comments were text revisions as opposed to dimensions, and the applicant has addressed those revisions, and you have a clean copy in front of you. The applicant, again, Phil Meyer from Baughman Company, if you have any questions, and staff is happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks. So just to be clear for me, the item in here that says there's outstanding text items, et cetera, those have all been cleared up.
Correct. This was written receiving the revised document. So we have received those, and you are looking at the current plans in your packet.
Great, thanks. Does anyone have any questions for staff or Phil on this one? Hearing none. We will take a motion on this one, please.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairperson, I, Vance Garwood, make a motion that we approve the space site at Teradyne Estates final plat. Recommend the governing body accept the dedication of land for public purposes.
Thank you, Vance. Do we have a second?
Tim Hendrick, second.
Thank you, Tim. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairperson, I'd just like to make sure that it's on the notes and the public knows that the subdivision does review all this and we hammer things out. And what we're doing tonight is just, we're not trying to pass things through without people knowing what's going on, but we try to do that work beforehand so that this committee can get things done in a timely manner.
Gary, thank you. I think that's very appropriate. You're right. Yeah. Could be the appearance that it's moving through a little quickly up here, but it's because you guys did all the heavy lifting at subdivision. So thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that, Gary. Item number 5.5 is the final PUD of the Heritage Mixed Use First Edition. Les, staff?
I'll go ahead and
You
take
got
this
it
one
again.
too. I'll bring it home. The subject area is generally located north of Highway 54 and the west and east sides of Yorktown Parkway. This final PUD contains parcels 3 through 7 and Reserve B on approximately 23.75 acres of property, which includes the primary commercial component of the project, including a 5-story mixed-use building containing housing, parking, and ground-level commercial uses. Another part of this property, parcels 1, 2A, 2B, and Reserve A will be platted at a later date, but for this meeting, this is the section that the applicant has brought forward to be platted. The final PUD complies with the subdivision regulations. We have gone through a few rounds with the applicant in terms of comments. The applicant has successfully addressed all of our comments. The subdivision committee did review this item at their June 8th meeting and recommended that the planning commission approve the final planned unit development plan with the condition that the applicant submit a completed traffic study and further refine the ownership and maintenance responsibilities of Block 3. At that meeting, we discussed how that would be done, whether that be done via text or some other method on the plan. The applicant did submit a revised plan that contains additional language regarding the maintenance of those Block 3 properties. There is just some discussion due to the unique nature of the project, who would be maintaining the different levels and the street in front and the public area and those types of things. So with the additional language that our legal team was working with theirs, we were able to include that on this item. So at this point, I would go ahead and turn it over to the applicant if they are willing to speak. But if you have any questions for staff, you're more than welcome to ask, and we're happy to help.
So you did receive that traffic study?
Traffic study, we have not received yet in full, but we did address item 1 of 2, which was the language regarding maintenance of Block 3. So at the moment, we have not received a completed or revised traffic study.
Okay.
Jason, good to have you here tonight. If
Certainly. Good to see you all. Jason Gish, MKEC Engineering, representing the applicant. And yes, as you know, we've been working on this for a while and we're got 90+% there. And we've got a few little details that we're trying to still get submitted on the progress of that traffic study. I know I mentioned to you that we're there at subdivision that we were very close. We've talked to our consultant who's working on that. And I always have to get out the information to tell you all the technical pieces, but I believe we're within a week of having it. And it's basically the number crunching piece. They have to get all the metrics, if you will, correct. And then we can produce the final report that kind of gives credence to what you're seeing on some of the line work here. So, and as Mr. Constantino mentioned, the other item is that language for that block that basically, as we discussed, also allows for public uses on private property. And I know we discussed that a little bit. And if there's any questions that I can try to answer still related to either of those topics or any others for that matter, I'll do my best.
Jason, I know Vance and I were there at that meeting and we understand, but could you very briefly let the rest of the committee know what's going on with the maintenance and ownership of Block 3?
And how out of the ordinary it is,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, certainly. So, and I don't do this as well as Les. He really says it very well, but I'll give it a shot. So there could be multiple ownerships on this parcel. And those ownerships not only occur at the ground level, they're occurring vertically. So, and they don't line up perfect. They're all offset. So, so what we're trying to do is because of the complicated nature of the architectural component and just the site and making that all meld together, I kind of like to think of it as kind of like a blanket easement that allows us to provide at the ground level ways for the public to get to the buildings, get between the buildings from the parking to the street side, kind of the main street side of the buildings. And for us to be able to utilize our TIF funding, if you will, to help create that so that we have this seamless streetscape, if you will, all the way from the right of way up to the front of the building. So that's kind of a short synopsis of what it is. If there may be more, but that's, I think, a fairly good summary.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That helped me a bunch. Thank you.
Certainly.
Question, and I don't know if it's for staff or what, but so the traffic study, what's the end product of a traffic study? What could that lead to that we're waiting on?
Sure. Eric, that's a great question. The traffic study would be the basis for all of the access controls that you see on the plat, the placement of driveways, the spacing of driveways, the pedestrian routes, as well as any traffic calming that the traffic engineers may see as necessary, because you remember there are some connections from this development to the existing neighborhoods on the north and the east. We've seen that preliminary report. We've kicked it back and forth between the city's traffic engineer and the developer's traffic engineer. They're working on those minute details that will make your head spin about how many trips are generated by each of these uses and all of the variables that go into that. They just haven't come to the finish line with all of those recommendations yet. What you see here is what's been gleaned of that report in the state that it's in today.
Okay.
So Les, would you say that you're probably 95% there? You're just trying to get, okay, we're going to stage at this light or this intersection 4 or 5 cars. Is that kind of where
Right.
you're
That's
at?
kind of the level of detail it's down to now
Okay.
about the trips that are generated by X number of square feet of retail versus Y square feet of multifamily versus a parking lot. And again, to substantiate those traffic calming measures that you see on this circulation plan. I think probably the best thing there would be for Jason to explain those to you. Because
Please,
he
yeah.
has applied several different traffic calming measures.
Yeah, certainly I can expound on that. So if you recall clear back when we were looking at the preliminary PUD, kind of for the greater area, this plat, as you know, is kind of focused from Founders Parkway to the Kellogg right of way. We still have that sliver that's kind of between the residential that's out there today and the Founders Parkway. But the ideas for the traffic calming are all kind of related in principles of how they work. So, for instance, and I don't see the pointer this evening over here, but I can basically point to, let's start from the right side of, if we're looking at these screens. So at Yorktown, yeah, thank you. The first street that's north-south is called Homestead. So at that intersection there, you'll notice a couple things where we've pinched the street to just the two drive lanes and the turn lane, so that we try to shorten the distance for pedestrians to get across. And also, and that's true at all the intersections. And what we're also trying to do is we're going to raise, we're actually designing it right now, but we're recommending in the traffic study that those intersections be raised. And what I mean by that is the vehicular traffic will be down in the curb, and when they approach the intersection, they'll ramp up. And what that does is it gives us a pedestrian hierarchy where we're treating the pedestrian on the intersection in a safe manner. It's also slowing down cars so that you have an interruption into your normal flow. And that occurs at that intersection. And then the main intersection that I'll call it, that hub right there, that's Heritage and Founders. That will have a raised intersection, and our hope is that we have contrasting materials and colors so that we can see these things in the pavement. So we have a narrative that talks about these things. The next point of traffic calming on this, the Founders Parkway, would be the crosswalk. So as you know, we have this drainage spine, if you will, through the project, and that is where the public parks occur. And so we have this pedestrian way that we want to be highly utilized through there. So at that location, we want to have a nice crossing that's they call that a speed table. So it will be raised as well, so that you won't walk down a ramp, you'll just go right on across. And then the same thing is proposed then at Sunset, and that's the next T intersection to the west there. Yeah, thank you. So those same measures as we would, the report talks about how do we address that on Willowbrook. So things like continuing to have raised intersections at that future T there, which would be Willowbrook and then Shea. And then so all of these things kind of try to work in harmony so that we can protect the neighborhood and protect the pedestrians and just the nature of the development, since the idea is that it's mixed use not only in zoning uses, but transportation, modes of transportation, things like that.
So if I understood what Gary just asked a minute ago, some dots just got connected for me. This is all built around what we think the traffic study will show, but until it comes in, this is all kind of, I guess you could say in pencil, not in pen, contingent upon seeing the traffic study, but this is expected. Okay.
And the intent of this is to make it pedestrian friendly, correct?
Yes.
That they would have the right of way. And what would the speed limit be in all of this development?
The Backage Road, I believe the speed limit is probably projected or recommended to be a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, because it's a local road, and that information comes out of the corridor study that you all did years ago. So that will also help as part of the traffic calming, just the speed. Yeah, I pulled this up. I had this ready, but then I didn't. But yeah, just a little bit to back up from subdivision. Some of the things that have to happen that we were working through is between us and the city traffic engineer is to make sure that we're kind of on the same page, because this isn't just the heritage project. This is your goal to get all the way over to Onewood. So in kind of the big picture, we want to make sure that when we send this to KDOT, that we are in unison and singing on the same sheet of paper, or from the same sheet of paper, so that it all is dovetailed together. And so we had to work out, what is the real traffic generations. We, of course, tried to perform that during the COVID whole thing. And so we had to work to make sure that we were accounting for real projections, because we weren't seeing everything that was normally there from previous years. So things like that helps us generate trip generation tables, internal capture calculations, develop kind of our development area map, which basically talks about types of land uses and the projected traffic that would be going to those, and then just volume and distribution. So those kind of pillars, if you will, they put it into the machine, so to speak, and it calculates the data, and then we can show that.
Any other questions for Jason? No? Well, thank you. That was
Certainly.
really helpful. Any further discussion regarding this?
So I'd say some of the members of the public might enjoy seeing some of the additional, I don't even know what you call it here, the mock-ups that there is on page 20 of the 59. If they can be put up there, maybe not, but it's very interesting, and anybody who's here that's interested in it would, I think, enjoy seeing it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's like
Certainly
20,
helps
21.
clarify in.
Yeah, and there's probably additional as well. I just haven't, I'm not saying them all right here, but yeah.
Yeah, and learning of all the steps taken to prioritize the foot traffic and
Yep.
traffic calming. Staff, there was a member of the audience that raised their hand and wanted to speak. With your permission, I'm going to allow him to. So, sir, please, if you would. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, John Lafine, 301 South Sunflower Lane. Our residence is at the upper left part of the property there. Thank you for Mr. Gish and everybody for the traffic plan. Thank you very much. So my questions are stemming from, a couple things. We're discussing the first edition this evening, correct? I mean, there's other additions that will extend the project to the north and to the west as it progresses. So am I understanding that correctly? That's my first question. Okay, thank you. In regards to the traffic study, Mr. Gish is making comments and he's welcome to respond, but it sounds like it's going to be encompassing more than just the first edition that we're talking about tonight. Is that correct? Okay. So at an appropriate time, maybe this evening is not the appropriate time, myself, some of the other neighbors in the neighborhood have some concerns, which I think we've written to Lance and Justin. They've been very gracious and helpful in explaining those, but how the traffic is going to be impacted at like Willowbrook and Andover Road, for example, and how that's going to be managed in the growth, even out to 2040 or these other plans that I just scanned through. But what I'm understanding, I think I'm answering my own question, where the final traffic study is not in yet, correct?
Correct.
And it's not, and then we're not prepared this evening to talk about the traffic impact outside of the applicant's area tonight. Is that correct? I mean, as I'm sure you as the planning commissioner are going to have to address the city impacts outside of as a result of the additional traffic. I think that's my concern. And so will that be brought up at perhaps a subdivision meeting coming up in the future or a future planning meeting? Is that a more appropriate time to possibly?
Please, Les, if you look like you're ready to respond.
Sure. I've read that draft of the traffic study, and I've been a part of the dialogue between the two traffic engineers. A lot of what Mr. Lafine is asking about are things that the two traffic engineers had to come to an agreement over. Traffic engineering is a science, but there's also an art as to how mostly the distribution of traffic is determined. It's fairly scientific that a retail store will generate X number of trips per square foot, but the behavioral patterns of those customers is a little bit more of an art. And the two engineers had different opinions, and they had to come together and understand each other's views and come to a compromise as to what they felt was the appropriate distribution. They've looked at each one of these intersections. They've looked at Willowbrook and Andover Road. They've looked at the future Founders Parkway and Andover Road. They've even looked at Andover Road and Sunset Drive and US 54, and the distribution of this traffic from this as a fully developed project and what effect it would have on traffic conditions at each one of those points. They're close, just not there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Les. So I think with that, I will wait. I will reserve any other comment till we see the final plan. And then it sounds like that's an appropriate time to actually ask questions then, I imagine.
Yeah. I agree, but we appreciate you taking the time this evening.
No
Thanks for
problem.
coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other further discussion along lines?
I'll just mention that to the planning commission, just for a point of information, that if you are interested in approving this item this evening, it would be conditioned upon a completed traffic study. Yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and put that out there.
No, thank you very much.
Did I hear Jason right? He said, Jason, sorry, you left the podium, but did you say within the week or so? Is that what I thought I heard you say regarding the traffic study, or did I mishear?
No, that's correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
okay, thank you.
You'll receive it within a week, and is there any time after that when it's all, a time frame of when it's gonna take to get it all completed? You or less?
I think our intent, and Les can correct me, but I think our intent is to be able to share that. So that I think there's an obligation there to do that. So that's what we're aiming to do, and fully, let Mr. Lafine and any of the neighbors ask questions after they've looked at it.
Thank you.
Well, certainly take our time, and if we have any more questions, ask them, but if not, or when we're ready, we'll entertain a motion, and certainly remember what Justin brought up as well.
Does it also need to be subject to proper language regarding the public use on the private property?
That part has been addressed.
Okay, that
So
was done.
just the
Okay.
traffic study.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Mr. Chairperson, I, Gary Israel, make a motion that we approve modifications to the Heritage Mixed Use First Edition Final PUD Plan and recommend that the governing body accept the dedication of land for public purposes contingent on a completed traffic study.
Second by Kirsten Barnes.
Motion by Gary, second by Kirsten to approve with modifications. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Mr. Levine, thank you for coming out this evening. We appreciate that. That brings us to member items. Anybody have anything for the good of the cause?
I have one question for staff. Who's responsible for keeping the Redbud Trail concrete clean of gravel and,
That's our Public Works Department primarily.
okay. I know they're doing work there at the overpass for the turnpike. And, I'm riding on Redbud Trail. I love that trail. But, I picked up a sliver of a rock, from the work that's being done and got a flat tire. And, it seems like it's gotten just a little bit worse over the last few weeks because of the work that's going on right there. So I don't know if there were any plans for, a cleanup to be done on that or waiting till they get the turnpike over, that bridge done.
We'll mention that to Rick and Public Works. That's actually a Kansas Turnpike Authority project that's going on overhead. And it's their job to keep that trail cleared off underneath their bridge work. So
Yeah.
we'll pass that along.
Okay. Well, I'll carry eggs from now on and throw it at construction workers. But I love Redbud Trail. It's
Yeah, it is.
a fantastic way to get out and be safe from the traffic that's out on the streets.
I just had a question that popped in my head for some reason when Gary said that. As we kind of all get back to normal and gathering and stuff, thankfully, are there plans for events at the amphitheater coming up?
We have a full slate of events.
That's awesome. I should know that, but I don't.
Concerts, Music Theater, Wichita, Greater Andover Days, a lot of things going on.
This will be a better summer than last summer.
Yes. I did have one item just to let you all know. Over the past several months, we've been contemplating some changes to our sign regulations. There are some conflicts between state law, local law, and the Supreme Court case from that Reed versus Gilbert suit many years ago that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, that we would like to bring a change to the zoning regulations to you at your next meeting. In order to do that, we would need your approval to strike up a public hearing to change the zoning regulations to kind of clear up that conflict between regulations.
So are you looking for a motion this evening to
Yes,
have a public hearing at our next meeting?
yes.
Mr. Chairperson, I would make a motion that we allow for a public meeting to discuss changes in the signage for the city of Andover. And we do that at our next Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals meeting.
Thank you, Gary. I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Look forward to it. Well, hearing nothing else, I'll look for a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
I, Vance Garwood, make a motion that we adjourn the meeting for tonight.
Do we have a second?
Ken Hendricks, second.
Thank you, sir. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Jason, I have one question for you.